Hi, this is Jim Musser with Upstream Ministries, and this is episode 61 on Views from Downstream. And you'll notice that I've got a clean face again because I have my hand back to a certain degree. All the cast is off. So I made a commitment that I would keep my goatee until I got the cast off, and got the cast off recently, and thus shaved to be clean shaven again, and be back to my younger self, if I can say that. Um, so this week, I want to just follow up on the assumptions that we covered over the last 2 weeks, and rather from a negative point of view, looking at it in terms of, okay, how do we approach this in a positive fashion to rectify the assumptions are being made, and to develop new ways of looking at things, new ways of approaching things. And a lot of this is not new to me, and it's not new to you if you've been listening, but it bears repeating. I just think some of the things, the assumptions that I talked about are so ingrained in the local church and parents who participate in the church that we just have to keep repeating, uh, perhaps from different angles, but the same kind of message that parents are responsible for raising their kids spiritually. They are the main influencers of their kids' lives, and particularly as it pertains to their relationship with God and knowing Him and loving Him. And so I talked about just the assumption that the church is the place for all this spiritual growth and raising of kids is to take place in the context of the local church programs. And parents believe that because I think they've been persuaded by the church that that's the best way to do it. Church offers up these great youth programs and children's programs and want those kids to be involved. And again, the intentions are not being questioned here. It is the effectiveness. And again, go back to the statistics. Kids who are graduating from high school are not, over a majority, are not following up on their faith and growing in it and walking with the Lord over their lifetimes. They are forsaking the Lord after they graduate from high school in large numbers. And so what can we change about that? Well, I think the main emphasis that the local church needs to look at in terms of its mission, as Jesus talked about in the Matthew 28, that we are to make disciples. And this isn't merely just preaching a sermon, as I've said many times. It is not having adults show up, kids show up and participate in programs. This really is training them to follow Jesus. And I just don't think there's much effort on that part. I think leaders are frustrated because parents are so busy, and they often get turned down the opportunities. So I think there needs to be probably a different approach than what we've done. It can't necessarily be, well, let's have another discipleship class on a Saturday or in the evening, because there's just all kinds of scheduling challenges with those things. I think that the best way to approach this is to focus on Sunday morning, where the parents are, for the most part, showing up, and other adults, young adults who aren't married, and make that the focus of our discipleship training. And you can come up with a lot of different ways. You can be very creative with this, but the reality is I think you need to pare back the length of the sermon and the approach. I think you have to get the congregation engaged in what is being proclaimed. And So I really encourage you as pastors and church leaders to really give thought to changing that up to get people more engaged on a Sunday morning. We know that that 30 to 40-minute lecture, in a sense, is not as effective without a lot of support and training to get people to learn how to follow through on that. Again, I've used example, you can tell your congregants to go and reach your neighborhood for Christ, but if they've never done that, if they've never had any practice in doing that, they won't do it because they just will think it's beyond their ability. They'll be too nervous. We have to give them some kind of experience. So what I want to challenge you as leaders is to really be creative in thinking, how can we turn the Sunday morning service into a real training time? Now, it doesn't have to be, a lot of people who work have training sessions and they probably have some negative views about that. It doesn't have to be that, but I think you have to get people engaged, talking to each other, talking to the pastor, having discussion back and forth, depending on the size of your church. But you just have to get people engaged. And there has to be a plan laid out that this is what our aim is, this is what our goal. So what will it look like for you to successfully disciple the adults in your church? What will that look like? Establish that, and then begin to develop a strategy to reach that. But again, if you're just thinking the sermon is going to do that and that's enough, then you're off on the wrong foot. It's not going to work very well. And so that you have to step back from that. You have to put the preaching, the sermon on the table for change. Now, I'm not saying again that you eliminate preaching. I don't believe that. But we have to move away from this sermon-centered understanding of discipleship, because that doesn't work. The sermon can be a part of that, but we need to use it to build on something much, much broader and deeper. And so I'm going to leave that there for you to think about, and then we'll come back on Wednesday and talk a little more about that and talk about parents and what they can be doing. So have a great day, and we'll see you on Wednesday.